Krystal Ball is an amazing representative for Bernie Sanders. Now, I know she's not an official campaign surrogate the way like a Nina Turner or someone like Killer Mike is. And I think she hasn't endorsed because of her contract with The Hill. But let's keep it real. Everywhere she goes, she stumps for Bernie Sanders. It's pretty obvious who she supports. Pretty clear, right? And every time she goes on CNN, she does a great job. Anytime she's on MSM in general, seems like she's usually on CNN. But after all of the fuckery that the DNC has been doing with the Iowa results, it seems that she has gone on Krystal Ball, that is, onto CNN to basically talk about the race. And you guys are going to check that out right here.
Krystal Ball, you correctly point out that Bernie Sanders received the most votes from voters who showed up to the caucuses in both the first round and the realignment, at least with 71% of precincts reporting. Again, I suppose that could change too. But Paul brings up a good point, which is in the progressive lane, and this is something you do a lot of reporting and care deeply about, Bernie Sanders did edge out Elizabeth Warren, or is beating her by a fairly substantial margin. Now, that's in Iowa. It's coming back to New Hampshire, where they're both from bordering states. But what does that tell you right now about the battle for progressive voters?
Well, I think we've seen this over the past several months, actually, as a consolidating of the progressive lane behind Bernie Sanders. I would trace it back to when Elizabeth Warren seemed to waffle on Medicare for All. First, she hesitated on how she would pay for it. Then she put out this transition plan that a lot of progressives really saw as sort of backing away from Medicare for All. And ever since then, we've seen a movement towards Sanders among progressives and a movement towards him in terms of who voters overall trust in terms of health care. So as we come into New Hampshire, it is going to come down to an anti-establishment lane versus an establishment lane. And right now you've got one clear choice in the anti-establishment lane, Bernie Sanders, and really a muddle among the establishment or more centrist candidates. The longer that people stay in the race and divide up that vote, frankly, the better it is for Bernie Sanders. So I think he actually is in a decent position, even though Karen and Paul are absolutely right. Would have been better if we had results and he could actually say, I got the most votes clearly and definitively, but I think he's fairly well positioned at this point.
For you, the story is still the process, yes?
I mean, there are a number of stories here, but the process is horrendous. I mean, how can you feel good about a situation where party elites decide to selectively release partial results that disproportionately benefit one candidate? Paul's absolutely right. If Pete ends up being the winner of the state delegates, he's been completely robbed by this. But let's not miss the fact that we don't actually know if that is the case. And Bernie Sanders very much leads in the popular vote here as well. So I think it's been interesting, too, the media narrative that has come out of this. I heard you talking earlier about how Bernie didn't meet expectations. He literally won the most votes. At least that's what it looks like right now. I'm not sure what other metric you were supposed to judge by. I mean, this is a guy who's been dismissed throughout this entire campaign, asked by the media when he's going to drop out, caricatured as angry and divisive, and he has a low ceiling and he can't possibly win. He actually got the most votes in the state after Democrats have been running around for 4 years talking about how the popular vote is supposed to be what matters. I don't see how you look at that and say that he has a bad night. On the other hand, probably the biggest story coming out of this and the biggest beneficiary of this whole debacle is Joe Biden, whose support has completely collapsed. And here's a metric that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. Yes, Iowa is an overwhelmingly white state, but I don't want to erase the voters of color who are, in fact, there. It looks at this point that Joe Biden did not win a single majority African-American precinct, and Bernie Sanders was actually dominant with voters of color. 43% of voters of color went to Bernie Sanders, far outpacing any of his rivals. So when you look at who has the coalition to go the distance, those early indications look like demographics are lining up well for Senator Sanders.
So she did a really great job there, per usual. I definitely liked many of her points. Now, the first point she makes about the popular vote actually is kind of crucial. Although we don't even really have to make that argument. Now, the thing is that Bernie Sanders has demolished in the popular vote. In the first round, I believe right now he's up by like 4,000 or 6,000 votes, and then in the final he's up by less. I think it was like 2,000 or something like that, somewhere around there. So he's winning pretty like strongly in terms of the popular vote. It's not all that close. But even with the state equivalent delegates now, and I know that these results for the satellite caucuses came out after Krystal Ball was on CNN, but he's actually going to lose the SDE count as well, the state equivalent delegates. state delegate equivalent, that count is going to be lost by Pete Buttigieg. He's going to lose it. So Bernie's going to clean sweep. He's going to win in first round voting, final round voting, and he's also going to win in a state equivalent, state delegate equivalent count. So we don't even really have to make that argument. Now, I also appreciate how she talks about Joe Biden failing because, again, as I tell you guys, man, these mainstream media outlets control a lot more than you think. They control essentially everything because it's the narrative that plays into everybody's minds, and that's where the majority of people are watching their news. That's where most of the news is disseminated in the first place. And so with having Krystal Ball on there to explain, look, Joe Biden is sucking really bad right now. He's completely underperforming. He is not performing well. Well, what that tells you is that, a lot of people are going to see that, and then in their minds, it's going to start to get ingrained that, oh, Joe Biden's not doing well. He's no longer really a front runner. I'm losing energy for this guy. I'm losing interest in this guy. Like, guys, it's getting so bad. I did a segment on they're literal donors of Joe Biden who are like, oh, we're kind of waiting to see what happens. We might switch to Bloomberg if he doesn't do so well. So he's literal in an existential threat mode. Like, he might, like, legitimately just completely implode, which is insane. So that's kind of what you're looking at as of right now. That's a really good thing for her to bring up. Of course, Joe Biden completely failed. He didn't even come in third. He came in fourth. And then I think her last point was actually probably the most important, and that is that there's this idea that, oh, Bernie's a white guy and all he has is white people as his supporters. They're all males. They're all, sausage fest. Well, it turns out, actually, that all of the ethnicities, there's different ethnicities, and funny enough, Iowa's 94% white. All of them went for Bernie Sanders, and they're actually the reason why he won. You guys saw those videos of caucuses at mosques with Muslims where all of them voted for Bernie Sanders. Rohingya Muslims who were, refugees coming together at a caucus. We saw Hispanic voters, all of them going for Bernie except for very few of them not going for Bernie Sanders. We saw those videos. You can see those. There's videos, there's pictures. So I think that's really crucial because there's this dumb narrative, this false narrative that Bernie Sanders is this white guy who only appeals to white people. He doesn't have a diverse base. Now, when it comes to non-white voters, Bernie Sanders actually leads. And I don't know why, but it feels like the media pretends like black people are the only non-white group in the United States. I mean, I got news for you. It's not just black people who are non-white. There's a lot of other people who are non-white. Okay? Obviously, there's, you got Middle Easterns, you got, Hispanics, all these different groups, right? So, yes, he's doing very well with those voters, and that completely destroys and demolishes the narrative, and hopefully that carries to South Carolina. So, Krystal Ball, once again, doing a great job just tearing down the anti-Bernie Sanders narrative at CNN.